Hey everyone, Joe Waxman here. And in this video, I want to look at the chart of John Lennon. I already did the chart of Paul McCartney's a while ago, and it's about time I got to John Lennon. So let's not waste any time. Here we go. Alrighty. So just off, I got to say, John Lennon's chart is it's a little difficult to read at first. It took me a while to sort of make sense of everything going on. But we have this conglomeration of planets in the seventh house, sixth house, seventh house, depending on how you look at it. Sixth house moving into seventh house because Neptune here is clearly in the sixth. Mars in between sixth and seventh. That probably has some of both effects, but it is the ascendant lord. And then North Node and Sun conjunct descendant, Sun by 3 degrees. So it's very much, Sun's very much in the seventh house, or affecting the descendant, which is the main point of the seventh house. So very strong seventh house. Not a lot of dignity here for either Sun or Mars, which is the ascendant lord, but it is angular. I mean, especially for the Sun being on the descendant. So there's some interesting things going on here. Number one, that planets that are not in good dignity, especially such important planets, his Sun and his ascendant lord Mars, are going to create a disharmony. And he was known even as a young kid. I mean, he did have difficult upbringing with his parents. His father left early. He was raised around his mother, but I think by his older sister. And he became very rebellious, and to the point where other people were noticing him as sort of a bad influence. Right. And that's typical for Libra Sun or Libra Mars, because they're not in good dignity, especially in the seventh house. They're going to be relating to other people representing that poor dignity. I mean, just if you want an example, a very easy example is Eminem, Libra Sun. And I can't remember if he had Libra Mars. I'm not sure, but he had a bunch of planets out of dignity. So does John Lennon. And Eminem, although incredibly talented, if you listen to him, I mean, he's really, really difficult to listen to. His lyrics, they're like violent, aggressive, really degenerate, talking about raping women and all sorts of stuff. And it's like, oh, like really bad. But he is super talented and famous, and people like that. People like, debilitated planets have a certain appeal because they can play a bad guy really well. They're excellent at that. And, that appeals to people who are also either have debilitated planets or are just negative in general. They just want they want somebody who represents them and expresses their negativity. So that's really kind of popular and common to have, famous people with negative, bad dignity in planets, and that they become really famous and popular. But the Sun being on the descendant, it is angular, so there is some dignity here, accidental dignity, and being conjunct the North Node. Any planet conjunct the North Node, which here it's closest to the Sun, but also the ascendant lord, it's going to blow up the person. I mean, North Node really just creates this like obsessive, worldly kind of materialism. And so North Node conjunct the Sun can create a famous person because their ego is overblown. It's just blowing out the ego. Conjunct the ascendant lord, same thing, because that's also representing that person. It's just overblowing them, making them bigger than life. Kind of, and you see this pretty often. It can indicate fame or just somebody who's just very confident about themselves. Here it's interesting because South Node is conjunct the Ascendant, North Node conjunct the Sun and the Ascendant Lord, and the Descendant. So his egos, first of all, he's starting out super confident because South Node shows skills, talents that we're born with. So he's born being, this super confident Aries Ascendant with South Node, conjunct South Node. It's, 8 degrees apart, 8, 9, a little over 8, almost 9. Anyway, it's still close enough. It's in the 12th house by quadrant, but close enough to the ascendant that it's strongly affecting the ascendant, giving him this great ease of being. Like he's just confident, he's sure of himself, and as he gets older, it's just increasing more and more. Now he does need relationships because of the 7th house in order to feel like his ego is. In order to identify with his ego, he needs to relate to people. Romantic partners, his bandmates. He did not strike out. I read something interesting. He did not. Sometimes Paul McCartney would write a song and just do the whole thing on his own. And John Lennon would be really insulted that he wasn't included. And somebody asked him, "Don't you ever do that?" And he said, "No." Because he's because of this North Node in the 7th house. So he's like relying on other people. I mean, he did eventually break out because there's the North Node conjunct the Sun, North Node conjunct Mars, but it's still a mix. He's not super independent, even though he's kind of independent. He's like independent, right? Especially in Libra. He needed Yoko Ono was super important to him even after he left the Beatles. And he did a lot of collaborative work. I mean, Sun conjunct the Descendant is very good also for performance, because even though it's not great for like marriage partnerships because there's too much ego, and it's just like this, somebody with Sun in the Descendant can become blind to their partner because it's just the Sun blinds everything. So here he's just blinding. He's bringing his ego into the relationship. But it's like I've said before many times, it's great on stage because you got that spotlight. When you're on stage, you got the spotlight. You want to be a light unto yourself when you're performing. So a lot of famous people have Sun on the Descendant. It gives them that huge ego, which is like the sun itself, or like the spotlight, is shining out while on stage. So here you can relate to masses of people. Not so great for one-on-one, but for the masses, yeah, sure. North Node conjunct the Sun, and even in Libra, like I said, the bad guy image. And John Lennon was he did have a little bit of that bad guy edge. Even though, like, surprisingly, I looked up a lot of the Beatles songs that I thought would be written by John Lennon, and now they're Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney was really the creative force behind the Beatles. John Lennon, not as much. John Lennon was just more like a icon. He has this iconic quality. He's not nearly as creative as Paul McCartney. And I know some diehard John Lennon fans will probably, strongly disagree with me, and they'll be like, "What about Imagine?" Okay. Or any of the songs he did later, but Imagine's not really that great a song. It's not, compared to the Beatles. John Lennon just isn't on his own. He doesn't measure up. I mean, his popularity is based on the Beatles, the success of the Beatles, and he wouldn't have had a good career on his own. He just wouldn't have. I'm sorry. I mean, not as a singer-songwriter. He's just not nearly as successful. He was a great collaborator with Paul McCartney, but I gotta say, Paul McCartney's the real creative force behind the songwriting duo. John Lennon was, although a great frontman, creatively backup. He was creative backup, editorial, because a lot of this, 6th house activity, this Mars, I think, is still in the 6th house, 6 and 7. I think it's both, because after all, it's debilitated. like you got to look at his life experience. Like, how do you explain getting shot? Okay, well, definitely debilitated seventh house planets would explain that, because that shows relationships with others. So like other people are debilitated when it's in the seventh house. If you have seventh house planets that have bad dignity, you're attracting debilitated people towards you. So he's surrounding himself with weak people. Obviously not Paul McCartney, but other people who he's attracting. Not naming names. Okay, I will name names. Yoko Ono. Debilitated partnerships. I'm sorry, but everybody knows it. I'm not trying to be mean, but she represents debilitated, people with debilitated planets in the seventh house attract debilitated partners. But, well, okay, so Mars is in detriment, so bad dignity. Sorry for long usage of words, but yeah, undignified partners for sure. And then as well, the remedy for this, by the way, is to help weaker people. You have to satisfy the energy of the planets. So whether it's like eighth house, sixth house, poor dignity, 12th house, if you satisfy the karma of the planets, then you won't get the negative results. But if he's not helping weaker people, sick people, people in need, it's going to attract very strong karma from a weak, person with bad dignity. That's his karma. He needed to help weak people. And because I've seen this before, people with debilitated planets in the seventh house, best use of it is you take people who are sick, who are needy, who are wounded in some way, who need your help, you help them. That satisfies the requirements. That can even become a career. Doctors, counselors, therapists, things like that, nurses, taking care of sick people, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever. Sick, needy people. He should have been more charitable. I don't know if he was charitable or not. Probably spent too much time doing heroin and living in bed. Hey, don't hate me. I'm just the messenger. Yeah, the heroin addiction, laying in bed, being hypocritical. I didn't look favorably upon that whole thing, but anyway. Not saying he wasn't talented, he was. He's got Jupiter and Saturn conjunct 2 degrees from the second house cusp. Now, if you use Placidus, the cusp would be down here, but right now I'm using Porphyry. It just makes more sense to me. Anyway, regardless, voice, we know voice is very strong, not only second house, but Taurus, because Aries Ascendant, so all the houses are going to be in their associative signs. So voice is strongly represented, also Uranus and Taurus, all 3 retrograde. Now, I think one of my understandings is that retrograde planets and fixed signs, especially Taurus, become very stubborn. These become the people who because they're turning in or turning, it's like a mule or a ox who's just stubbornly refusing to move, right? It has that kind of vibration, that energy. Like you take an ox and he won't move, like he's just standing there. That's a retrograde planet, especially in Taurus. But any fixed sign will have that similar quality. And so he's going to have this stubborn fighting quality where he's just not going to do what you want him to do. And there's a certain rebellious quality to that, especially with Saturn. I mean, Jupiter, not so much, but Saturn and Uranus, both very much so. Retrograde in Taurus will create this unmoving quality. It's just going to stand up for what he believes in, or whether good or bad, right or wrong. I'm not saying that. It's probably some of both. And he was like that. He was very stubborn, even as a kid. This is where a lot of his rebellion comes from. And also his voice. I mean, he was not known for like this fantastic voice. He had a good voice. He had a fine voice. But But yeah, definitely voice and this very stubborn quality. You know, the bed-in, the protest, the peace, all the peace talk, peace, Libra, right? Jupiter and Saturn also, they are retrograde, but they would have come together in Taurus, and that's called the Great Conjunction. When they come together, it is very significant. So I think this is a big part of his who he was. I mean, it's in the second house, so definitely represents voice, resources, assets, things of that nature. But it's also Saturn is ruling 10th house, 11th house. Jupiter is ruling 12th house and the 9th house. So he's bringing his career, his groups and community networks, success, hopes, wishes, dreams, 12th house creativity, foreign things, and his belief system all into the second house. So he's making all, you know, singing voice out of from all of that, you know, singing his beliefs, his career, and his creativity. So that's all going into the second house, and that makes a lot of sense. Uranus is very unique, independent, rebellious, and dynamic. Uranus has a nice trine to Neptune. Neptune also a planet of great creativity, imagination, imagine. In Virgo, along with Venus in Virgo. Venus and Virgo in the 5th house. Venus debilitated. Debilitated in Virgo. But both these planets are very creative. Neptune in the 6th, Venus in the 5th in Virgo. And in Virgo, you often see this in artists, surprisingly enough, because Virgo, being opposite Pisces, has the ability to really edit the creative process. And, you know, if Paul McCartney being the main creative force, then John Lennon have this great editorial ability, that makes a lot of sense, right? Paul's just like always coming up with new stuff and, you know, being super duper creative. And John's like taking that creativity and being like, okay, let's, you know, do it this way and that way and add this and that. And then it comes out really brilliant because of that opposition. So I'm saying Paul's a little bit more Neptunian, creative, and John's a little bit more Virgo, you know, editorial, critical, right? And so that's why their partnership was so good. I'm not really that much of a fan of Paul McCartney on his own either. I think he's super creative, but he's a little too fruity for me. I don't know. There's something about the combination, the John is a little more Saturnian, Virgoan, Libran, and Paul, I can't remember his chart, but you know, anyway, I already said it. His mother was hit by a car and died, and her name was Julia, and he wrote the song Julia after her. And we can see that here. We can see a few things. Number one, that early rise to success. He did form a band that became the Beatles when he was like 15, I think, initially. And it did not take them long to, you know, gain some recognition. So early rise to success. Moon in Aquarius. Moon in Aquarius gives him a lot of levity, and there's a lot of jokiness, and also his socialist communist leanings. You know, Moon in the 10th house in Aquarius, moving into the 11th house, 10th, 11th. Significations. I mean, he was kind of like, his politics were not very well evolved. I mean, you know, the whole thing, it's just subversive. I mean, I could go on. I don't want to get too into that, but like the whole socialism, communism thing, it's like, you know, it sounds good if barely sounds good. Like, oh, let's have the government take care of us and everything for free, and all the poor people will be taken care of. But really, it's slavery. I mean, that's the essence of communism and even socialism. So anyway, slavery, I'm not a fan of slavery. I'm just not. Anyway, Moon is opposite Chiron and Pluto, and that's very dangerous here, obviously. And so Pluto Chiron is the car that hit his mother, you know. It's also showing a very destructive quality within him, because Moon and Chiron to Moon, or sorry, Pluto and Chiron it to Moon, opposite Moon. The opposition is not a, it's also debilitated Venus in conjunct Moon. That also, because it's really tight as well. That's, very difficult. Mental instability. Moon in Aquarius would also tend to be, potentially unstable, especially in it's moving to the 11th house. Here it's thinking very big, and he imagine, right? Hopes, wishes, dreams. But his moon is not, astrology doesn't lie. His hopes, wishes, dreams were not all that. And he was a heroin addict. We can't ignore that. It doesn't matter how famous he was and how many fans he had and how great some people think the song Imagine is, or, whatever. He was a heroin addict. I don't know when he started or when he stopped, if he stopped, but like the whole thing, the bed in, like protesting, yeah, okay. It's good to protest war, and I would have supported, I support peace, but like, how impractical was that protest? Laying in bed for peace while he was doing heroin with his wife Yoko Ono, and he had his maids, change the sheets daily and serve him, and it's like, what good did that do, really? It annoyed President Nixon at the time, and he tried to deport him, but and maybe he got other people, so there probably was some good things, rallying people to go against the war. But it's such kind of like a hypocritical thing, because nobody else can really do that. Who can do heroin every day and stay in bed while their maids cook and clean and change the sheets and all that sort of thing. Whatever. It's obnoxious to me. So his idealism, which 11th house is, hopes, wishes, dreams, that's ideals. It's being very idealistic. So I have Moon in the 11th house. I'm not criticizing, obviously not criticizing the 11th house. I'm very idealistic too, but your ideals have to be healthy ideals. Otherwise you're pushing for the wrong things. And I think it is, some of the things that he did were off base. And we can see that with the two really strong, harsh aspects to the moon. Moon does make a nice trine to Mars. So his passion is coming out, right? Because Moon to Mars, and Mars is very passionate. Moon is the internal, emotional, the heart, the satisfaction, what our needs are. And so his ability, and this Mars being, 6th, 7th house, it's coming out. It's coming out to the public. His passion and his ability to emotionally express that. Plus Mars is his ascendant lord, so it's a prominent planet for him, obviously. And so the other thing, and I didn't even, okay, so Mercury in Scorpio, in 7th house quadrant, moving into the 8th house, 8th house, close enough to the 8th house cusp that we could say that it's definitely part of the 8th house. Mercury is ruling 3rd house and 6th house cusps. 6th in the 8th house is actually quite good, because it shows that difficulties, conflicts, hostilities, competition, enemies, things like that are going to the 8th house to die. So like somebody, I don't know any examples of this, but like if somebody tries to sue John Lennon, or like Nixon, like tried to deport him and then it didn't go through. So stuff like that happened. Like you can have enemies, they try and get their way with him, and it goes away. It doesn't go through. 3rd house in the 8th house is creating a very deep expression. And in Scorpio, so he's thinking about like the occult. He's thinking about deep topics, deep things, life and death, rebirth. The occult, secrets, hidden things, sex, sexuality, psychology. It's becoming dark and heavy, but also very powerful. Things in the 8th house gain a lot of weight. All right, they become heavyweights in the 8th house because the power, the transformations, they become transformed. And jealousy, power, control, things of that nature. Also, Mercury is a sensitive planet, so Mercury in Scorpio in the 8th house can also indicate certain mental imbalances. I would say this. Let's see. It's not really opposite. I mean, it is opposite. It is lightly opposite Saturn and Jupiter, so that also is kind of challenging, quite difficult. But this difficult moon and this difficult Mercury, I would say there could be tendency towards mental illness, and I think we saw that with the drug abuse. And there's a light square between them. So I would say there's mental imbalance. 6th house is the house of health. I was trying to relate it to being shot. I don't know if that really, I think it's the debilitated Mars in the 7th house, or Mars in detriment in the 7th house. But let's look at his Reconyx chart because you can see a little more from there. Okay, first of all, we're seeing even more ascendant activity. Obviously, the aspects are the same. So, I mean, North Node conjunct the Sun is just the same thing, but it's in Aries. So now it's charging up his ascendant more. The South Node, and then this Mercury in Aries as well. Mercury gains directional strength in the 1st house. And who's John Lennon? If not mercurial. I mean, writer, prolific singer, communicator, right? Who's very outspoken, about everything. And so now we're seeing really his ascendant is coming alive. And that's why I say he's iconic, right? Because South Node in Aries, Aries ascendant also. I mean, it's just, it is a pretty strong ascendant. It's very natural because Aries in the 1st house, Aries very natural in the 1st house. And then the addition of the North Node, Sun in Aries, Sun is exalted in Aries, and then Mercury. So this is really superpowering his ascendant. MC in Gemini, again, Mercury, career at a mercurial career, right? And it's going into the 1st house. Moon in Cancer in the 4th house. Now this shows really underneath his heart is that he was very happy. The quote that about his childhood was that he was raised by 5 powerful women, his mother, and then like his siblings. I don't know who the other ones were, but okay. So Moon in Cancer, right? Very feminine energy, and he said that made him a feminist. Also shows that the death of his mother really, really hurt him because of, Moon in Cancer in the Draconic chart in the 4th house shows really strong attachment to that female energy. And it's a good moon. Moon is, in domicile and happy in the 4th house. So he's like happy at home. He did have a happy childhood, even though it was difficult, like happy with the women in his life. And that his, the death of his mother really had strong hurtful impact on him because of the attachment to the motherly paradigm, his mother in general. And here we're seeing even more action on the the seventh whole sign house, but close to the sun and the ascendant lord. Mars pretty much conjunct the Draconic South node, Libra ascendant, North node, Sun, descendant. So ascendant, descendant are really getting very charged, and Sun as well, and ascendant Lord. So all these things are really powering up his ego, his personality, his self, his being, making him as a person iconic. That's what I'm saying. It's not his voice. It's not his songwriting ability. It's that John Lennon was this icon as a human being, his whole being. It's energetic, really, is what is the point. It's that, we have these powerful people, they can do stuff. There's certain people who's just like, that their skills are just off the charts and that's why they're famous. There are other people who they are iconic, and no matter what they do, they're going to be successful at because it's who they are, right? And we can't separate them from their skills. Like, you cannot take them away from their skills because it's not really their skills, it's who they are. Like, as some people I I'd say it's like somebody has a really great voice, you could say that they're a voice on a stick, meaning that you could separate their voice or their skill or their talent, whatever, and put it on a stick, and that'd be great on its own. But somebody like John Lennon, it wasn't his voice, it wasn't his writing ability. I don't think it was even his editing ability. It was him. It was the icon of John Lennon. Yeah, he did have some skills, some talents which added to it, but really the whole thing was him. We're seeing a lot of Scorpio here as well. Jupiter and Saturn conjunct at 2 degrees Scorpio, and Uranus at 14 degrees Scorpio, and then Mercury in Scorpio. And that's just adding to this dark, destructive quality that John Lennon had. It made him a lot more dangerous and deep and dark and heavy, and occultic. The Beatles were occult. The Beatles were into the occult. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say that. A lot of their stuff, and we get all this stuff about looking at Sgt. Pepper's cover and I Am the Walrus. There's some creepy stuff that they were into, some dark, evil things. I know that they were into, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So some spirituality as well, but they were into the darker occult stuff. I don't know the details of their involvement. I don't know if they got into anything really bad. Some people say they did. Could be. I don't know. But we can see that involvement here with Scorpio 8th house things. Definitely into the mysteries of life. Definitely into the hidden qualities, hidden nature. I don't usually get as much into draconic aspects, but Uranus is opposite this Jupiter Saturn conjunction, and that makes it a lot more dynamic, powerful, brings in a sense of discord, yeah, I don't know exactly, I can't say this is different from a natal opposition, so I'm not going to comment on what it would mean. I just think it brings in a quality of tension. It adds a lot to the tension, and you can see a lot of these squares coming up between natal and draconic 3-degree moon, 2-degree Jupiter Saturn conjunction. I mean, that's pretty intense. Here we get the powerful 10th house with Pluto and Chiron. Pluto making him very very powerful, intense career-wise in the public image. Chiron also kind of like this outsider, this rebel, unique, misfit. And that very much played into the whole 60s vibe. You know, they were trying to, you know, being an outsider was something that was celebrated at that time because of the rebellious nature of the, you know, the Pluto Uranus conjunction was in Virgo, so right on his 6th house. So this was activating his 6th house, making him a fighter, even though he was fighting for, you know, peace. You know, Libra is very strong in his chart. He was still fighting. So that, you know, that's all very prominent. Venus in Aquarius, 11th house. Again, this idealism, this socialist kind of theme that, you know, came into his songs. It's prominent. Venus also in the 11th house. By the way, Jupiter in the 2nd house for money. Venus in the 11th house also. You know, Draconic is not going to have as much influence, obviously, but it's still there. And then, you know, powerful creativity here. Neptune and Mars in Pisces. Draconically. So that's adding to the creativity. Obviously, he was still a creative. I'm just saying that Paul was a greater creative force than John Lennon. Not saying that John Lennon wasn't creative. But yeah, that's it. That's pretty much it. And I think that really paints a nice, well-rounded picture of John Lennon as best as I could. Don't think I can really say anything else. It's really, I think it really comes down to his ascendant, descendant, the nodes, the north and south node, and the sun and the ascendant lord. Like, it's just supercharging his whole persona, his whole being, his ego, everything. And then what skills he had just wrote on top of that. They were secondary. His skills were secondary to the power of his sun, his ascendant lord. Even through the debilitation, it was the angular quality of it. And we see the strength coming out underneath in the Draconic chart. And just in case anyone has any doubts about the Draconic chart, I think I've proven it again and again and again how really valid it is. But I mean, even in my chart, I can feel it. I know my Draconic chart is influencing me. Once I've taken a good look at it, it just added a whole nother dimension to who I was. And it really explains a lot more than just the natal on its own. It's a secondary influence. It's not the primary influence, but it's like it rounds it out and it fills in the gaps. It fills in the holes that aren't obvious in the natal chart. Right? Like exalted sun, Mercury, all in Aries, you know, fueling up this ascendant, north node conjunct the sun, ascendant here in Libra, south node in Libra. So yeah. Anyway, I think you guys get it. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you haven't. Share. Book a reading with me. Go to Macro Gold Machine at yahoo.com. That's my email. Or go to my website at macroastrology.com. And leave a comment if you like. Say anything, whatever you like. And I will see you again soon. All right. Thank you. Bye.